Sometimes in programs you want to do something, the same thing, multiple times. So you want to do it more than one time. At the moment all our programs have done one thing once. So we've had the guess the number game. You had one guess of the number. If you didn't get it right, the program ended. If you got it right, the program still ended. But it just did it once. We're going to look at now something called iteration or repetition, which allows you to do things more than once. So here I've got an example of a program that does something. It prints out that I'm doing something. That's it. That's all it does. So if I run that, we should just get I am doing something until I press enter. Don't worry, I put read line, I put read key. Works just as well. If I want to do that, if I want to do something several times, I could just copy and paste. I'm now doing 4 things. But although that works, it's not very nice programming. It makes programs longer than they need to be. It means there's more code to read, and it can also be harder to understand. So instead of just copying and pasting something, I'm going to create a for loop. A for loop is a structure in programming that allows me to do something a set number of times. So I want to do this 4 times. So to do that I use a for loop, and I'm going to have a counter that's going to count from 1 to 4. I'll explain the structure in a moment, but I've just put in this line and this line, and when I run it I'm doing something 4 times. If I change this to 10, I'm now doing something 10 times. So there's a very brief, quick example of how to do something more than once. So let's have a look at what this code is saying. The for goes at the beginning of what you want to do. So what I want to do is do something. So I want to execute these 2 lines, although this is just a comment, so I'm really only executing this line. So this goes above it. I've then got to set up a variable, and the variable is going to keep track of how many times I've done something. So in this example I've used the word counter. It's as always, you should use sensible identifiers for your variables. It helps when you're reading the program, it helps other people when they're reading the program to understand what's going on. So I've called my variable counter because it's counting. So I've created a variable. Now what you might notice, I don't need to do a dim up here at the top. I don't need to do a dim counter as integer. You can if you want, it won't come up with any errors, but if you create a variable within a for loop, it automatically creates the variable just the same way as it does for other things, but it will create it just for existence within this for loop. So you don't need to worry about that, which is quite nice. So I've got my for loop, and I'm saying I've created a variable called counter, and the equals 1, the 1 is its starting value. So the first time, when we first get to this line of the code, it will assign the number 1 to the variable counter, and it's going to go up until counter has the value of 10, and it will increment by 1 the value of counter every time it gets to the word next. So we've got the variable counter which starts at number 1. The first time through this loop it does the console, it prints out I'm doing something, it gets to the next, and it increments counter, adds 1 onto it. So counter at the first start was 1, it's now 2. It goes back round to this line and it looks at the end value and says, is the current value of counter equal to this? The current value of counter is 2, that's not equal to 10, so it does it again, adds 1, counter is now 3, is that 10? No. Does this, adds 1, and it keeps looping round. So in the, oh dear, I didn't want to do that. In the earlier example, let me do 3 times because that's easier, quicker to explain. Let's say we want to do this 3 times. So the first time round counter will be 1, counter will get the value of 1, and it will print out I'm doing something. It will get to next, it will increment counter. Counter is now 2. It will say, is that equal to 3? No, it will do it. It will get to here, say add 1 on, it get to 3, it will say, is it 3? Yes, so it will do it and then finish. So it will go through when counter is 1, 2 and 3 and then finish. So that's how you can get a very simple for loop working. So we can check that, check it works, and you can see it does it 3 times. So it'd be good to get that example working. For loops can be quite confusing at the start, but they're not too bad once you get the hang of them. The most difficult thing is knowing when to use them. That's the real challenge, and something you'll find probably quite difficult. But for the time being, let's just stick to simple examples. So, right, a second example of a for loop, a more useful example, is going back to our guess the number game. So if we have a look at this program, this is very similar to the program we saw earlier. I've changed it slightly. I've got 2 variables, one called random number, one called player guess, both are integers. I talked about random numbers earlier on in one of the videos. If you remember, randomize makes sure that numbers really are as random as the computer can make them. So you've got to put randomize in, otherwise you can predict the numbers, which isn't very good for random numbers. So you stick in randomize, and I then have this variable random number, which I created above. I'm assigning it the value. I'm creating a random number between 0 and 1. I'm timesing that by 10, so I'm getting a number between 0 and 10, which I didn't really want because I want that 0 and 9, and I'm adding 1. So that will get me a random number between, oh no, that was right, wasn't it? That wasn't. Yeah, sorry, that's it. That will get me a number between 1 and 10, which is what I wanted. I don't want the 0. So the numbers here can be between 1 and 10. If you remember, the other thing I need to do is to convert it to an integer. I don't want decimal, so I'm going to convert it to an integer. It'll chop off any decimal values after the decimal point, and so either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or 10 will be stored in random number. I then ask the user to enter a guess, and I get their guess, making sure it's converted to an integer. We're trusting at the moment the user to be sensible and not be typing in silly things, so we're trusting them to type in a sensible number. The next thing I do is a little select case, and I say, well, I'm just going to give the user some help. I say, well, based on player guess, if it's less than the random number, tell them it's too low. If it's equal to the random number, tell them well done, and if it's more than the random number, tell them too high. So if I run this at the moment, enter my guess, 5, too high. But the program ends. It's not particularly useful. So what I want to do is add in a for loop here that's going to allow the user 3 guesses. So what I'll do, I don't want to keep creating the random number. I want to create the random number and then stick with it. So after the random number, I'm going to put a for loop in, and I'm going to put in what should I put? I'll call it guess counter, because that's what it's doing. It's guessing the counts. And I'm going to start it at 1, and I'm going to go up to up to 3. So they're going to have 3 guesses. Every time I loop, I want to ask what you guess. I want to get the answer from the user. I then want to make a decision whether it's too low, well, or the same, well done, or too high. But that's it. So the next goes here. So what I want every time to run is this. This is really the heart of the game. Prompt the user to enter the guess, get the guess, and decide whether it's correct or not. So there, this is what's changed. I put this line here for guess counter equals 1 to 3. Guess counter, just a sensible identifier for that variable. I don't need to dim it because it's within the for loop, so it's automatically created. I don't need to worry too much about that. It will start at 1. It will go through this when guess counter is 1, when it's 2, and when it's 3, and then it will finish. So the user gets 3 guesses. So let's see if I can guess the number. So if I go here, I enter my guess, I'll start with 5. Too low, I'll try 8. Too low, I'll try 9. Well done, I've done it. Well done. So there I had a game where it looped round 3 times before it finished. So let's try again. Let's try 7. Too low. Let's try 9. Too high. 8. Well done. So that's very good. Works out well. I might want to be more generous and give the user 5 guesses. I haven't needed it so far, but you never know. 5. Oh, well, this is that was a good guess. First of all, it was 5, but notice what happens. Even though I've got the right answer, I still have to keep playing, which isn't very good. And we'll come to that later on. We'll look at some different kind of loops, not for loops, and we'll look at how you can solve that problem. For the time being, just ignore it. Okay, so there's an introduction to some for loops.